So there they are, Aiden and Ellie, the only survivors to have not succumbed to the apocalypse. Still in their late teens, the two are in their prime, at least when it comes to baby making. The good news is they have the hots for each other, but can they repopulate the Earth? You all know that there's a version of human history that involves two folks getting it on and kicking off.
What if one of them is gay?
Two starstruck lovers were animated. A couple that made the Garden of Eden their home. Not exactly sure what kind of food they had to sustain their lives in the garden.
How about strawberries?
Or than the forbidden fruit. As for Aiden and Ellie, there's plenty of food on their lonely planet. The old blue ball.
This is not hate, y'all. This is two random humans, not nothing else.
Intelligence that wipes everything out.
Yeah.
But then it destroyed itself just before it could finish off the last two humans. The animals are still around. The AI was programmed to ensure the sustainability of the Earth at any cost. And then it figured out that humans were going to.
Is this telling me I'm a computer?
The only rational thing to do was to destroy all the humans. Yeah, whoever developed that program.
Luckily, I'm an anomaly. I'm a potato. I'm everything and everywhere all at once. You can't destroy me.
For the first couple of months, Aiden and Ellie didn't really think much about starting mankind again. They spent much of their time hanging out in rich people's houses and driving fast cars. Ellie almost drove into a tree one day, and after that, the couple decided not to take too many risks. There was some serious business to take care of. Thankfully, they lived in Los Angeles, California, which, having a mild climate, meant the couple didn't have anything to fear from a brutal winter. And the fact that there was no electricity. Let's just start by saying that while the apocalypse was a bit of a downer, these two got very lucky in terms of their chances of survival. They also had the added bonus of
they gonna get lucky in more ways than one.
Studies have shown that when children are born from folks who are related, there's a higher rate of infant mortality.
And coming out like this,
There's a much higher
like why you about to do incest?
some kind of defect. Nonetheless, Ellie and Aiden's offspring might be born healthy, but what about the offspring's offspring?
And the offspring's offspring. It's a whole bunch of instruments.
Slovakia, between the years of 1933 and 1970, scientists looked at the children of parents who were first-degree relatives. First degree is someone in your direct family. Procreating with these people isn't generally a cool thing to do. Even if first cousins get it on, the offspring has double
Why is the grandma below?
In that study, the kids who were born to first-degree parents didn't have great outcomes. 40% of them had very severe disabilities. 14% of them died because of their disabilities. We have a very good real-life example of this, featuring a man you might think was trying to increase the population of his country. That man was King Chulalongkorn of Thailand, who ruled from 1868 to
They was doing this for real. I knew this.
a lot of good things in terms of modernizing his country, and he was also a formidable baby maker, just as his father had been. That father was King Mongkut, who had 82 children in total. One of them was Chulalongkorn. Following in his daddy's footsteps, Chulalongkorn had a lot of wives, adding up to 116 women in total. To keep the bloodline pure, several of his partners, with whom he'd had children, were actually his half-sisters. Back in those days, it still wasn't clear how bad inbreeding was, but the proof soon became evident in the pudding.
Not enough to say, copy paste.
Sinajar Nuradhi Rajputri. It died just hours after it was born.
Like Pippin.
Kids with his half-sister Safang Vadhana. One of them lived for just 3 days, and most of them didn't make it to adulthood.
Dang.
Vadhana herself lived until the ripe old age of 93. She was the product of inbreeding. In fact, if you research what happened to his
Imagine going through childbirth just for argument to go through.
didn't live very long at all. A lot of them died when they were barely out of their fancy infant clothes. Many others died in their 20s and 30s. European royalty was also into keeping things in the family to ensure the bloodline was pure. And also to make certain money and property stay within the family after someone passed away. European inbreeding in royal families was very evident in the Spanish Habsburg dynasty. Offspring were often weak and sickly. There was also the now famous deformity called the Habsburg jaw. The internet might have been down in Aiden and Ellie's Brave New World, but they did have access to books and libraries, and being the prudent folks they were, they read up on inbreeding. After going through
We read up on it, figured out what's going to happen, and you still did it.
they let out that first primal scream. Or perhaps spend their short lives hobbling around while carrying a jaw that would put desperate.
It's dandy.
The couple also read about the Colt family in Australia and the marriage between June and Jim.
I mean, it's called the cult. Cults.
She married Jim.
Cults. Like, think about it.
At the time, they had 7 kids of their
Might not have the best decision making.
More kids were born once those kids were old enough to have children. But the Colts didn't stray much farther than their own home.
Because you move, if you're supposed to move what you did.
Incest. A lot of the kids had defects, and some seemed a little mentally deranged and did things like hurt animals. Many were very sickly and prone to disease. Incest wasn't working out so well for the family.
No
When an investigator found them, he said it was like nothing I'd ever seen. The story said down Aiden and Ellie's spines, with both of them just sitting for a while in the library, thinking about a team of kids running around with fungal feet trying to set cows on fire. But did it have to be that way? That's the big question.
Why would you want
So,
that?
not many of King Chulalongkorn's children that he had with sisters went on to have fairly normal lives, though admittedly it's hard to find kids who lived past the age of 40. Aiden and Ellie were now certain that a small gene pool was going to lead to a future offspring of physically and mentally ill kids once their own children started procreating. But what choice did they have? They had one kid, a boy, and named him Carl. Then they had another kid, and they
Carl,
named him Asher.
Walking Dead too soon. It's been like 3 years, but too soon.
Asher when they were fighting over toys, after which Ellie and Aiden had a third child and named him Sebastian, another boy.
Under the sea.
These last two adults
Under the sea.
pumping out kid after kid, as many in fact as was possible given Ellie's natural aging process.
The boys. I want to blame you, guys.
Different matter altogether.
I don't know what it's mean.
Something now before we get to the strange case of the extended family. You heard of that thing called DNA. While it has packaged into its 23 pairs of chromosomes, within every chromosome there are hundreds of thousands of genes. It's these things that will determine human characteristics, such as hair color, but some of them are also bad for the bone.
Ass size.
Literally. Every gene has a couple of copies and they are called alleles. When two people have a child, they pass on one pair to the child. There are dominant and recessive genes. One pair of genes is
The future is out there.
that gene when it's passed to you. With recessive genes,
Albert Einstein looking at us.
you need both pairs of the genes to gain the trait. For example,
Not bullying, it's an astute observation.
if you get that, you will have brown eyes. But for blue eyes, it's different because that gene is recessive. You need both recessive genes to get blue eyes. In this case, both your parents passed on blue-eyed pairs of genes. But if one of your parents had the brown-eyed gene, you'd get brown eyes. Importantly, though, as you know, not all children get the same DNA from their parents unless they are twins. You get 50% of your DNA from both parents, making 100%. Now imagine that DNA.
Something about this just seems dirty to listen to. Like,
when the next
little
child is
room,
born, that pack is shuffled. So the
about
next child
swapping DNA.
DNA with all the same genes. But if there were lots of children and you kept shuffling the pack, at some point, some sets of genes will look similar to another child's. This is important to know as we go along with the Aiden and Ellie story. The good news is that many defective traits are carried in recessive genes. This is great because they aren't very common. And to get a harmful trait, you have to get a pair of them. This is exactly why it's good to play the field with strangers. Okay, that's a joke. But if your parents are related, there's more of a chance that they carry some defective gene. And in that case, the child might get a pair.
I hope not.
And one thing leads to another. A child is born with a chin that looks like an old boot. If there are generations all from the same gene pool, at some point, even with all the shuffling, some bad genes might.
That's some different type of
Emperor Charles II of Spain was the man famous for his chin. It took generations of inbreeding to make him like that.
famous for your chin sweat. It's not even that. It's not even that special. Like your nose is your head.
At age 38. Just to give you an idea of what can go wrong, here's his autopsy report. Heart was the size of a peppercorn. His lungs corroded. His intestines rotten and gangrenous. He had a single testicle black as coal. And his
Not your
head was
chin,
full
but
of
your
water.
head looking
When
like
Ellie read
mine.
that, she fainted on the spot just thinking about future generations of her family. The first thing that came to mind was a grandkid of hers looking like a character from a movie she'd watched as a kid called The Toxic Avenger. But then one day she was reading from another book and something improved her grim mood. She read the lines, "The evidence for the short-term effects of low genetic diversity is very strong, but all these things are probabilistic. There are stories of incredible journeys back from the brink. Anything is possible. You can get very lucky playing cards." Ellie tried to translate that in layman's terms and came to the conclusion that if she and Aiden knocked out enough kids, and those kids knocked out enough kids, then despite the fact that there will be lots of challenges, cow burning even, some of those kids could possibly flourish, and the future of mankind.
Nah, I want my kids to flourish. I don't even want them little demons. But like, if I'm gonna have kids, my kids, I'm like kids, my kids are gonna flourish. What you mean?
Some of her grandkids had lives that were, as one of her favorite writers would have put it, nasty and short. She and Aiden had 10 sons, 18 daughters in total. They in turn had kids with each other because that's just how things had to be. Evolution actually wants us to be attracted to people who are genetically different from us, but the future of mankind demanded they make do with each other. Ellie was still worried. worried, having read that there's more of a chance of defects the more inbreeding takes place, such as what happened to the Habsburgs. If only Ellie knew what genes all of her grandkids had, she could safely match them so children weren't born unhealthy, but that wasn't possible. She had a reason for some optimism, though, when she read about the people of the small island called Pingola, who lived far from the busy world in the Western Pacific. These people were almost wiped out in the 18th century when a typhoon struck the island, but 20 of them survived. They flourished after, even though a recessive gene ensured that many years later a tenth of the island was afflicted with color blindness. The thing was, this disorder called was thought to have come from one man, but it didn't show up in the population
6, 12, 42.
but still not everyone got it. This made Ellie
6, 12, 42.
sat there with the book in her hand, and with one of her granddaughters crying from a crib nearby, she repeated those words in her mind. Anything is possible, anything is possible. We're going to bounce back, she said under her breath in a determined voice, even though out of the corner of her eye she glimpsed one of her less successful byproducts giggling while throwing an aerosol can into a small fire. There was a long way to go yet, and what's called the founder effect was still in full swing, meaning a profound lack of genetic diversity as generations interbreed. Still, while Ellie's family admittedly all looked very similar, she held out hope that in generations to come, there would be natural mutations and some diversity would occur, since Aiden in those days seemed only interested in tending to
They just fucking each other. Like, no. They just fucking each other. I don't judge. I just say what I be thinking. I don't know.
and cattle, he'd become so distant, Ellie read more and more. In some ways, they were a perfect couple, with she being the academic one and he being so good with his hands. One day, Ellie
How is that a perfect couple? Has nothing to do with it.
in which animals likely created entire populations after starting as pairs. They were eating when she looked at him and shouted, "Rats!" "What?" replied Aiden, feeling confused. She told him a single pair of rats started a population on some island and the rats thrived. He then gave her a familiar look and said, "Don't tell me you read that in one of those printouts from that old website." Ellie went quiet and returned to her room, where she read the printout again. It said, starlings in North America originated from just 60 individuals. There are a couple 100 million of them now, most of which are nearly genetically identical.
We're actually closer to plants, right?
But she understood that
Is it
each small
plants?
population was different from the last two. She couldn't find any examples in her books when an animal species had gone down to the last pair and then started up again. Ellie died first. She was 93. Aiden, 92, held her hand as she drifted into the great unknown. At her side were all her kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids. One of them, known as Chinny to the rest, made her moan in distress just before passing away. That poor kid had just put some broken glass in his mouth. But she remembered some words written by a scientist back in 2015.
The heck, why even add that?
Founded by two people, you would have to get lucky in the genetic lottery many times. Ellie and Aiden might have been lucky, but
2015? They still, this is recent?
surrounded by all those faces, things didn't look too bad. Nonetheless, she knew things could take a turn for the worst. She also knew that a long time ago some researchers said you'd probably need 90
Is this illegal? How is this 2015?
There she was, looking at people who had come from her.
Which makes me think, why is it illegal?
Could it happen? Really? The repopulation of the planet from these two? The answer is yes, it could. Maybe. But as those scientists said, there would have to be a lot of luck. Perhaps if it did happen, thousands of years later, no one would believe the story of Ellie and Aiden,
I don't want it to
the
happen.
avid researcher and the Cabbage Patch Kid. The reality is scientists aren't sure how we evolved at the beginning, but they certainly don't think it all kicked off with two randy people in the Garden of Eden. They know there were a couple of types of humans, the Homo genus hanging out in Africa around a couple million years ago, such as Homo habilis, handyman, Homo erectus, upright man, and then it took quite a while for the presence of Homo sapiens, uptight man. Just kidding, it can be translated as wise man. Before Homo sapiens, the oldest form of humans mated with the newer kinds of humans, such as Homo neanderthalensis, Neanderthals. Neanderthals and modern humans also mated. So in short, it wasn't as if there was only a very small gene pool when things started.
My paper education.
We can't look at the case of Ellie and Aiden and compare it with something from the past. We can only hypothesize that if two people were left alone on the planet, they might be able to fill it up again. It's a long shot, but Ellie and Aiden at least tried. After that,
They could
we
fill it
should
up.
watch